Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, April 4th, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, commentary contributing editor, host of the Breaking History podcast, and contributor, columnist, staffer at the Free Press, Eli Lake. Hi, Eli.
Thank you, John.
You are very welcome. We're going to begin today with a treat. The treat is, I've been telling you for several months now that you needed to sign up at commentary.org to become a daily subscriber to Abe Greenwald's newsletter produced in the afternoons. And yesterday, Abe wrote, I think, his best, or one of his best, that sets the extraordinarily dramatic events of yesterday and the day before yesterday in stark relief in historical terms. So we're going to begin today with Abe reading yesterday's Abe Greenwald newsletter. So Abe, take it away.
All right. It's titled Shock Treatment. By my count, the U.S. has been rocked by 10 seismic shocks since the turn of the century. 1, the attacks of 9/11. 2, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. 3, the 2008 financial crisis. 4, Donald Trump's first election. 5, the COVID-19 pandemic. 6, the George Floyd/woke revolution. 7, the January 6th attack on the Capitol. 8, Joe Biden's cognitive impairment in office. 9, the rise of pro-terrorist mobs in the United States. 10, Donald Trump's second election. If Trump persists in his effort to undo global free trade, that will be the 11th. People will complain about it and argue against it, but we're already accepting it as a new fact of life. Americans have become so oriented to disorientation that nothing stirs genuine astonishment, let alone awe, in us. And we don't really expect to get back to a calmer, more predictable world, do we? Because beginning with 9/11, each shock made the next one less, not more, shocking. This partially explains why there was no organized resistance to Trump when he took office in January. And it also accounts for his swinging for every fence immediately all at once. If you're someone who wants to reshape the world, this is the time to act. Reality has never been more malleable. We don't know what type of earthquakes will hit before the end of the day, but whatever they are, they're not likely to blow anyone's mind. We're kind of numb. In fact, like daredevils who don't feel alive without risking death, there are whole constituencies in America now trying to summon ever more outlandish and totalizing experiences, just, I think, to no shock again. They want fresh conspiracies on an endless loop. They want UFOs to land. They want their ayahuasca visions. They want children with autism to be telepathic. They want AI to become super AI. They want to age in reverse. They want to merge with the internet once and for all. They desperately want to be awed because once you've gone through the looking glass and lived in Wonderland for a few years, Wonderland becomes just another place. The rest of us, no less fancifully, want to return to a more coherent reality. Was there ever such a thing? It's fashionable to say there wasn't. Stoics will tell you that the country was always more vexed than you remember and that you're just suffering from a nostalgic delusion. But they're wrong. Between the end of the Cold War and the attacks of 9/11, to take one stretch of time, things made more sense. The country was wildly imperfect in myriad ways, and there was no shortage of serious scandals, and wars did rage overseas. But even major events were of a scale that matched our ability to reckon with them. Horrors, such as the Oklahoma City bombing, were in the end discrete incidents. Look at the list at the top of this letter, and consider the new tariff regime. These have unpredictable consequences for all of us, and we're unable to do much, if anything, about them. For some, the only thing to do is be vigilantly suspicious. And Americans are now suspicious of everything. Media, government, neighbors, you name it. There's a trust crisis in America because the ground has been shifting under our feet for a quarter century. Distrust is how one acclimates to a world of perpetual upheaval. With each blow, we grow more numb, more delusional, and less trusting. Here we go again.
remarkable piece of writing and beautifully read. And I think it sets in context this question of whether or not Trump is going to get what he wants out of the big beautiful tariff or whatever he is calling it, or whether he's already gotten it. That is to say, he has sort of reset the world order by fiat, and that now the great fear, I would say, of liberal commentators, even some conservative commentators, is that simply by opening this door or by making this pronouncement, which could be walked back, or the emergency powers that he has asserted give him the authority to do this unilaterally rather than Congress actually setting tariffs, will be ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court or something like that. We've walked through the door. We've crossed the Rubicon. The United States has announced its intention to upend the post-war economic order that we worked so laboriously to try to help establish. So, Seth, how do you think that we're in a revolutionary period now that we built up over this 24 years that Abe lays out, from almost 24 years from 9/11 until the present, and that all of that was a kind of prelude to what Trump has broken through here?
I mean, in a way, I think also, I mean, for sure, it's like, medication or something that your body learns to metabolize faster, right? There's no question that there's some sort of a drug effect like that. And I think that ties into it because the drug is attention, right? Our attention spans throughout this period have been shaped also in a different way. And it's unlikely that people's attention spans can ever go back to what they were, right? So that facilitates more of these disruptions, I think, precisely because you become more inured to them. But the thing that concerns me about all that is that, as Abe writes, there actually was a normal time not that long ago. It's false, as Abe says, to say that there was no baseline normal period. And so we thought that period was a sort of, new normal. And instead, the end of the Cold War, the sort of the peace dividend, as Bill Clinton said it, where we started to care about things that were less important than whether we're going to all die in a nuclear holocaust, ended up being an interlude and not the new normal. It was it was supposed to return us from this crazy 20th century, which was also not supposed to be the new normal, right? Whatever. So I think that we're in a battle with the whole idea of what's normal, because looking Eli, back,
right. Eli, so your podcast, Breaking History, attempts to retell incidents or moments of the last, say, three generations, to remind people of the craziness that has overtaken America at certain periods. And a lot of what you talk about does not entirely conform with Abe's idea that there was once a recognizable reality in the 90s that somehow came to an end in 2001. You have a podcast about how Oliver Stone, a conspiratorial movie director, effectively changed and created and kept going for another 3 generations or 2 generations the JFK conspiracy theories that had started to quiet down before he released his movie. You have the story of San Francisco in the 1970s, and another podcast, your current podcast, is about the effect of a single academic, Edward Said, on the entirety of the way in which America and the West study the Middle East and the East, and how that has had a actual open effect on behavior on campuses that led to the Tentifada encampments that Abe, the pro-terrorist protests on campuses Abe mentioned. So I would just say, going back, and I wonder if that, again, maybe this has a deeper root than 9/11, because when I think of the 90s, and I do think, okay, well, we had this unprecedented prosperity, we had a peace dividend, we were able to, shrink the military, we got rid of a lot of nuclear weapons, we were living through a kind of what seems to be an Arcadian moment, but at the same time, we had the United States watching as a man whom we saw fleeing the cops in a Bronco on the LA freeway, because we all knew, everybody in America knew that he had murdered his wife and killed a delivery guy from a restaurant, almost slashing his head off, was acquitted of murder by a black jury because he was black. And we saw a president of the United States go in front of the American people and lie straight up about having been caught dead to rights, having had an extramarital assignation or a relationship in the Oval Office. And I would submit that those two events, you couldn't have Donald Trump without Bill Clinton saying, "I did not have sex with that woman." So even though that was almost 20 years earlier than Donald Trump's election, but nonetheless, what do you think of this timeline?
Well, I agree. It's a really brilliant piece of writing, and it's really thought-provoking. So bravo, Abe. It's, all the reason to subscribe to the newsletter as I do. I would say that though I think I would point to 68 to 1980 as a similar moment of unraveling. So 68 is the year that Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King are murdered. It's the year of the Paris, sort of 3 months of revolt and anarchy in France. It's the year of the Prague Spring. And then you have the 1970s, which, you have kids running away, you have the rise of cults, you have stagflation, you have Watergate, you have lots of attendant corruption, and you have a domestic terror issue that's very similar to what we've experienced after 9/11, although not on the same scale. So like things that we don't even remember, like the 1975 kidnapping and hijacking of an airplane of the entire OPEC conference, is just, and that's like a small example. There were 2 assassination attempts on Gerald Ford
in 18 days. Yeah.
And so the country seemed crazy in the 70s, and then the American people had the good sense to elect Ronald Reagan, and I felt like the country was seeming totally crazy in the last 8 years or so, or maybe even 10 years if you kind of look at the cultural trends. And instead of electing a Reagan figure, we elected like an anti-Reagan figure who didn't believe in any of the things that were the underpinnings of our prosperity and security, and thought that it was all a ripoff. Now, it's important to analyze that it's important to steelman that argument, even though I don't agree with it, and not just to dismiss it as economic illiteracy and kind of the fool ravings of a mad king. I mean, because Trump is speaking for a real constituency of Americans who felt that the prosperity experienced by the coasts, that globalization, you could say, made possible, had just devastated a way of life for lots of people who are living in the middle of the country. I don't think that tariffs will bring back the factories. I don't think anything can bring back the factories and that world where, auto workers in America were able to kind of have an opportunity to send their kids to college and experience like this kind of, I don't know how you're going to, you can't go back in time. But it's also fair to say that the people who were making the promises of neoliberalism didn't follow through, and not enough attention was paid to the, what things were like in Flint, Michigan, and these communities that were devastated in Ohio and other places like that, because those jobs never came back, and the new lives, the new communities were terrible for a lot of people, and that, I think, correctly caused resentment. Now, the correct thing to do would be to sort of say, all right, how do we, okay, how can we get, what's the new thing that can bring prosperity to this region? How do we think about that? Instead, what we have is, we have a president who, in my view, is reaping the whirlwind. I also appreciate what you said, John, which is that it may be reversed. He is capricious. We have seen things in Congress. There was a statement I saw from Chuck Grassley that said that Congress had to approve in 60 days all the new tariffs. So that's a hopeful sign, because in the same period that you've described, Abe, of these shocks to the system, Congress has neutered itself, which is something the founding fathers did not anticipate, that there would be a branch of government that would not assert its rights.
It's not just the tariffs, though the tariffs are, I think, the thing that really could have been the Trump going way too far over his skis in terms of the assertion of executive power. And there's a lot of controversy about this. But, in a courtroom yesterday afternoon, a judge that I assume is a big liberal and has a daughter who works for, the immigration causes and all of that, who was the person overseeing the case about the deportation of people on planes to El Salvador, humiliated a Justice Department official under Trump with apparently an unbelievably devastating series of questions about what happened when he issued an order saying that these planes that were deporting people without what he believed to be due process, how was that order delivered to the administration and received, and who decided to ignore the order, number one, and number two, what are the genuine constitutional grounds for using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to override more common understandings of due process? And from what I can tell, and I know I'm reading liberal accounts of this or something like that, he basically cut the guy's head off. I mean, he basically said, this administration has a real likelihood of losing this argument, this case, this constitutional argument, and the procedural case, and being held in contempt and all of that. Now, that is a fight that the administration may want to have on immigration, because it is very much, the American people are very much with it on the idea that this has gone too far and has to stop. And most of these people are members of a terrible gang, and they don't deserve anything but our scorn and our deportation, and they can be in jail forever, and we don't care. Nonetheless, if they can't make it stand up that they did it in a way that is legal, they're going to be hit hard, and they're going to be slapped down. The Supreme Court is not going to find in their favor, in my view. And then secondarily, as Nellie Bowles shows in her, as usual, brilliant morning newsletter, TGIF, this morning, I didn't know this, there is a Gallup poll on trade and the American public's attitude toward trade. And around about 2011 or 2010, 2011, the idea that exports were good for the American economy and promoted economic growth, or were bad, the free trade was good for economic growth or bad for economic growth. Those numbers were pretty close to being 50-50. And right now in 2025, according to this Gallup chart, 81% of the American people believe that free trade is good for economic growth, and 14% of the American people believe it is bad for economic growth. So unlike the immigration...
And can I add something about why that's so important? Because it was probably 10 years ago or so, but I remember I wrote a piece at Commentary, probably a decade ago, a post about, it was during the election, it must have been during the Romney-Obama election, but it was about the GOP and free trade. And it was I had shown several charts and trends, and the thing that came out about it was that when there is a party leader running for president, they tend to be more protectionist-ish, and they tend to bring the public along with them. And so if you followed the numbers, you saw the GOP try to get back to like a basically pro free trade. And I'm talking about GOP voters, not people in Congress. I'm telling you, these are polls, you know. What you saw was that people could be pulled along very easily by party leaders. This is significant because it's the opposite of that. The thing that used to happen was each party would run somebody for president as a challenger. And when that guy was a challenger, when the other side had the White House, the challenger would be more protectionist because he would say, are you really profiting? Is your life better than it was 4 years ago? All this other stuff. And it would pull people along. And Trump did that for a while, I think, with NAFTA and some of the other trade stuff. But Obama, if you remember, Obama ran in 2008 complaining about NAFTA. And then his top economic advisor went to the Canadians privately, it turned out, and said, well, he doesn't really mean it. He's not really going to do it or whatever. But even if you don't mean it, if you were running for president as an outsider, you ran as a bit of a protectionist. And when Obama did that, Democrats became more protectionist. And then, there was the rise of Trump and Republicans became more protectionist. And what's happening now is significant because it shows that there's actually a backlash within Republican circles on opinion on that Trump is having the opposite effect now, that people within his own coalition think he's gone too far. And that's unusual.
I have to wonder, though, if there's some effect here of kind of similar to when people were polled about the importance of protecting democracy. And you had people on the right who said, yes, it's important, but they were saying it not for the reasons that liberals thought. So they were saying, we have to protect democracy from liberal overreach and lawfare and a two-tier judicial system and all the rest of it. I'm wondering if there aren't protectionists or sort of protectionist types who now, because don't remember, Trump called what day on Wednesday Liberation Day. If they're not saying free trade is important, what we've had isn't free trade. It's been a rigged system where we've been fettered. We're going to get back to free trade. You're muted, John.
You're right. Here's how Gallup phrases it, because you may be onto something here. What do you think foreign trade means for America? Do you see foreign trade more as an opportunity for economic growth through increased U.S. exports, or a threat to the economy from foreign imports? And this number, this is before what happened this week. 81% say increased opportunity. 14% say threat. So I suppose that you could say that means that in theory, if you can, this is not a growth through increased U.S. exports. So yeah, you could say maybe Trump captures some of that because what he's saying is we want to build our export market, right? That's supposedly what this is all about, is we don't buy anything from them and they have to buy everything from us. Therefore, the trade deficit disappears. We make we make Thailand buy our mangosteens, even though we don't grow mangosteens, by putting a giant tariff on their mangosteens, right? So, but I mean, in theory, if you had a domestic mangosteen market and you put a huge tariff on it, maybe Americans would buy domestic mangosteens. It's not that there are a lot of Americans buying mangosteens, which are not what they sound like. Anyway, they're a kind of fruit. Well, they sound like a kind of fruit, but it's a weird kind of fruit. It's not a mango from the Caribbean. Anyway, so yeah, maybe this is a vaguer fact, but that Americans feel positively about trade as opposed to negatively about trade means that Trump is fighting a headwind. However you slice it, maybe they would be more inclined to support him, and therefore Republicans will be more inclined to say, yeah, he's fighting to make trade better, to make it healthier. But I don't know. I really don't know, and I don't think Americans care about the details that much, or they know that the tariff schedules are bananas, and we're punishing Lesotho, which has no domestic, is not importing anything here, is importing T-shirts here or something like that. Like
McDonald Island has been tariffed,
right, yeah,
and all of its four
yeah,
goats.
right. Now people aren't gonna like look in the details the way we are gonna look in the details, but there are these things, right? That
People are going to notice
Huh?
when people are going to notice when we have much more inflation. People are going to notice
Well,
when their
okay.
purchasing power diminishes, and people are going to
I
say,
agree.
"You ran on in the inflation issue, Donald Trump. What are you doing?"
Look, I agree that every rule of sort of like logic and, sort of, not that there are economic laws, but the economic laws being common sense as laid out by Adam Smith and others who simply applied the benefits of reason to how people do business with each other, that all of that is going to happen. But let's not even presume that there'll be an inflationary spike. Let's just sort of leave that to one side. Here's what they know. It's going to be more difficult to buy things, possibly. It's going to get more complicated. And their 401ks right now, this week. So, as we're taping this, the Dow hasn't opened on the markets haven't opened on Friday here in the United States. Dow futures are again down by more than 1,000 points as I'm speaking. Dow went down 1,600. We're talking now about a 10%. We're talking about almost certainly a 7 to 8% correction, maybe even a 10% correction by the beginning of next week. And 140 million. It was at one point 140 million, maybe 200 million people in one way or another are in the market in some fashion or other in terms of 401ks or how their businesses are invested and all of that. Like that's an instant hit. That's not even like what's going to happen down the road when they want to go buy something, because that's not even going to start happening until next week.
And it's also a very interesting moment because it clarifies this. There's this sort of fallacy among populist class warfare types where they think, oh, I don't care about the stock market. The stock market's this thing. It's this beast full of rich people. I'm talking about regular people. And as John's saying now, no. It's you merge with it at some point here. And if something bad happens to it, it's going to happen to you.
That's a lot of people who actually have money in markets, meaning they don't have it in their mattress. So it means that it's dynamically affected by larger economic trends. Either they, they're in a 401k, or they have a little money in a mutual fund, or again, like that they work for a business that depends on its stock market price being healthy for it to continue to employ them. I mean, there's a lot of different factors here, and this kind of bizarre poo-pooing of the importance of I also agree markets are transient, and you can't make long-term economic policy based on whether or not you can make sure that the market will be up or down. As everybody I know who does this for a living says, you can't time the market. Don't think about buying things that way. Don't think about selling things that way. The best thing you can do is a long-term hold in a lot of cases, unless you're a really, 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 really sophisticated investor playing, like at a craps table, playing 10 different bets at once. And people are going to be hurt by this immediately this week, next week. Like you look at your portfolio, you look at whatever you have, and it's down 10% where it was up, where it was over here, and now it's down here. And so that's a real effect. But I don't want to again like get back into the sort of the gyrations of the moment, because I do think this question is, did this become possible? This is sort of Trump's greatest desideratum, but to what extent was this kind of radical move? Is it, as your newsletter suggests, the culmination of a period of time in the United States in which people now believe that there is always a story under the story, and a story behind the story, and that there's someone to blame who is getting off scot-free. So that in this case, it is rich people, or it is our terrible policies that empower foreigners at the expense of Americans or something like that, that explains why we have trade deficits, as opposed to the fact that we have trade deficits because of a theory promulgated 200 years ago by David Ricardo, that there is such a thing as comparative advantage, and that the thing to do is to buy a good from the place where it is cheapest, and to maximize the goods that you produce that are of most value to other people, so that you don't waste your time growing things or making things in a cost and effective way. You get them from other people for whom it is cost effective, and you sell them the things that you make in the most cost effective way. That's literally free market thinking 101 from 1805 from David Ricardo. And here we are 20 years later, and we are basically throwing it out the window.
But even
Paul Krugman, by the way, won a Nobel Prize for basically rewriting David Ricardo, and people seem not to know that that was what he was doing. He won his Nobel Prize for praising and explaining comparative advantage in the globalized economy. Not that anyone should ever cite Paul Krugman about anything, but nonetheless, I just think it's an interesting fact.
No, but even free market thinking 101 is more counterintuitive than they're ripping us off, we're going to stop it. And, Trump harnesses every intuitive argument, false or accurate. The Republicans do generally right now. I mean, that's sort of something that's been going on. It's been the Democrats and the liberals who have been applying their academic theories and tinkering with our social lives and our with the culture, and the whole Trump thing, the whole MAGA is just saying no, stop. It's simple. It's checkers, and this, I think, is another manifestation of that kind of thinking.
Can I say there's another element here? Trump was correct in 2016 and in his presidency that we had not taken the real threat, the full spectrum of the threat from China seriously. And I who knows, there are many reasons why people vote for a candidate, but you have to assume some of them might have been because people agreed with him that, the presidents from both parties didn't do enough to look at the long tail and the long-term effect of bringing an authoritarian communist system into the global market, and not just from a trade imbalance, but from a national security perspective. Well, what is one of the first implications of Liberation Day? China, Japan, and South Korea are in talks on how to retaliate against America. Talk about undermining any strategic policy about containing China. That's your evidence right there. Donald Trump is somebody who has, I think, correctly talked about the horrors of a nuclear war. He is something he is, talked about his uncle, knew about nuclear weapons. It's something that he claims to care about. What is the effect of proving to the world that we are an entirely unreliable ally who will go back on our word and not even keep our promises on, like, how we were going to do the tariffs, let alone Ukraine and Zelensky and all of these other things? Well, the effect is that Poland says it wants a nuclear weapon, and probably the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, and who knows who else, Japan maybe, will want nuclear weapons. So we're going to have more nuclear states in the medium term as a result of this new Trumpian America First policy. These are huge deals, and he owns these mistakes. And that is not even getting at the constitutionality of his assertion. Now, that was made possible by other presidents and Congress and lots of other things. But I have to wonder, obviously some people must have said, wait a second, what are you doing? It's notable that Scott Bessent apparently wasn't involved in the final sort of making the new
Treasury
tariffs,
Secretary,
the Treasury Secretary. So I'm just kind of dumbfounded. I'm not ready to join the bulwark, but
Well, that's in 2007 that was James Mann, the foreign policy writer, was his. He wrote a book called The China Delusion, maybe the China something, the China. Hang on,
I'll
China
look it up. Go
Fantasy.
ahead.
The China Fantasy. James Mann wrote a book called The China Fantasy, and his concept was that we believed that bringing China into the global economy would, and to all these international organizations, would integrate them into the post Cold War democratic order, the end of history. And James Mann's book was the concept that he talked about was reverse integration. That what might happen instead is that China will integrate the rest of us into a Chinese-led order, meaning that people will see that China didn't have to become a democracy in order to, have, in order to improve its economy. They'll see that China didn't have to become a democracy in order to be integrated, right? If you want to join the European Union, you have to be a democracy in some fashion. If you want to join NATO, you have to have civilian control of the military, right? All these Western organizations, there are democratic baselines to join, but the economic ones there aren't. And so by pulling China in the economic ones, we said politically they'll also liberalize, because people will see, it's like, it's like looking at our Boris Yeltsin looking at our supermarkets or something. Like, the Chinese people will see that prosperity lies in the Western way. And instead, what happened was people saw that China had sort of figured out a life hack. There's a shortcut. You don't have to democratize. So what we're seeing is sort of the tail end of that, which is the reverse integration. And I don't know how you undo that at all.
Well,
what if that's a permanent state?
What's important about that set of observations is that the delusion that simply admitting an authoritarian to totalitarian country into the community of relatively free trading nations would have such an overwhelming effect on them, country born or marinated in a totalitarian ideology, was a delusion based on a fundamental misunderstanding, which is that the economics is the driving force of everything. Whereas we had seen in the Far East, in particular, in Taiwan, in Japan, certainly in many ways, and in South Korea, though these were top-down economies in many ways with, giant conglomerates and government industrial policy and all of that. But that these countries were not ideologically authoritarian. We're not ideologically driven to the idea that a cadre at the top needed to control everybody's life from stem to stern. That was just how things had developed, and that they could move from authoritarianism to democracy or something resembling democracy or whatever, in part because it was beneficial to the public. China. The delusion was that you can liberate China, and that, in the yada, yada, yada way, it would somehow surrender all of somehow its DNA would be morphed into a freedom-loving DNA, because freedom is in our souls and our breasts. And it, could have happened, except that Xi Jinping decided in 2015 that the thing to do was to make China communist totalitarian country again after 30 years of loosening, right? Like that was a political decision that was made by the leadership of China to consolidate its gains, and then to decide to use its internal authority to crack down on its population, to make sure that it understood that the national purpose was to get rich for a reason, which was to become a dominant, if not the dominating force, not only in its region, but possibly to be the great adversary to the United States. Now, Trump kind of understood that and kind of doesn't understand it. Like, he is not interested in going after China's power to rebalance the world, to make sure that China is not really a threat. He doesn't like it because it makes too much money from us. Not because we need to stop them, because they're building a military and they're going to try to take over Taiwan and they're turning the South China Sea into their private lake, and therefore they will threaten Australia and they will threaten New Zealand and they might threaten South Korea and Japan in 2 generations, but because they sell us things and we buy them and then we have a trade deficit with them, and that's not fair. And that's the worst argument. I mean, it's not the worst argument maybe if you're like making a bumper sticker, but it's the worst argument if you want to make something sticky over time, because then you do have the people going, well, I don't know, I don't want to pay $1,200 for my flat screen TV. I don't want to.
That's the great Dave Chappelle joke. It's like, I want to bring those jobs back here. It's like, I don't want to make iPhones. I don't want to make sneakers. I want to wear sneakers. I don't want to make Nikes. I want to wear Nikes.
Yeah.
But
So
more important,
yeah.
but he doesn't even, that's not even true though, because America did benefit from the fact that China managed to sort of, turn a population of peasants into something resembling a middle class. And that opened up a huge market for us and the rest of the world. And everybody got rich. It wasn't just China. And again, it's just amazing to me that he doesn't seem to understand anything more complicated than a trade deficit.
He doesn't believe in alliances.
Right.
Here's what we can say about Trump now of a certainty. He does not believe in alliances. He thinks that the alliances are a sucker's game. He likes to call people friends, who I think, based on our understanding of how he lives, is not what we would call friends. They're not, his friends are not friends in the way that we imagine friends to be. He does not believe in alliances. He thinks that alliances are ways that people screw you. That's NATO. That's trade agreements. That's having a relationship with Canada. That's having a relationship with almost anybody who isn't an advert. That what you try to do is soften your contentions with people who are your enemies to kind of figure out if there's a way to do business with them. But he doesn't believe in alliances, and now we can attack liberals a little bit. So my attack on liberals is that beginning in 2008, it was Barack Obama who laid the groundwork for where Donald Trump is now, who said America is not an exceptional nation. Barack Obama asked about American exceptionalism, said, well, we think we're exceptional and the Greeks think that the Greeks are exceptional. Every country thinks that it's exceptional. And that was not what American exceptionalism was as a doctrine, which he fully well knew. The idea was that America functions on the basis of ideas, and some of those ideas have this universalist tinge that means that what we have, our freedoms, our abilities to move around and do all that, are things that we can kind of export because we have seen them and we've made them work. And he thinks that we don't work and that these ideas stink, just like Obama did, but from a different vantage point. Obama thought that America wasn't exceptional because it was bad. It was bad to other countries. It was bad to other countries. And it made the world worse. And we invaded countries for no reason. And we were poisoning the atmosphere with our carbon. And we were doing all these bad things. And we needed to be restrained. And Trump is like the mirror image of that. It's like, they're all bad. They suck. They stink.
And the idea from Obama's perspective, and the idea that we are exceptional was bad. That it had real world, that it made us do things that, it was bad for the world, for America to have this self-confidence and this posture.
So let me bring this now full circle to Abe's newsletter and the larger point. So Obama thinks America's bad and Trump thinks America's bad in 2 different ways. Obama thinks America's bad because our system, our capitalists, all this unequal, unfair, poisoning the world, making wars, all of this, we're a blunderbuss. We go around, maybe even we mean well, but we do badly, right? Trump, we're screwed. The elites like Obama screwed people. Everybody's screwed. They don't want to sell our oil. They don't want us to dig our oil out of the ground. All they talk about is pollution. I don't care about pollution. I know I've been dealing with environmental regulations while I build things, and it sucks. And NATO wants things from us, and who the hell are they? All we did was save the world. We saved them from the Nazis, and now all they do is use our money to support themselves, and they suck. And you know what? They treat me like garbage, and they laugh at me, and I don't like them, and they can all drop dead. I bring this up to say that the 11 things that you mentioned, and then all of the weird irrationalisms that you lay out, that's not just the bad things, but as you say, people want to age in reverse. They want more AI. They want to sort of live in this world of magic. And that goes to Eli's Breaking History podcast, because what that means is, again, that Trump and Obama in different ways, and one from an elite perspective and one from a kind of talk radio, Art Bell, late at night, Tucker Carlson paranoid perspective, all together believe that there is a story behind the story. And that what Philip K. Dick, what we're seeing, the reality that we're seeing is not the reality that is actually controlling and containing things, right? That Capitalism in the 21st Century, Piketty's book, is a book about how billionaires are in control of the world's rules and economies, and they must all have their monies expropriated, because no one is ever going to profit until they are taken down, because they are building a system that is self-perpetuating but it's invisible, because it's
John, to quote the great Chris Eigeman in Barcelona.
Yes.
I keep reading all these books and novels, and they're always talking about this subtext. I just want to know, what's above the subtext?
Right. But I mean, really think about it.
Text, but they never talk about it.
Yeah.
Right.
So in order to get, as your JFK podcast shows, in order to get to the point at which you say that the account of the Warren Commission and JFK's assassination is wrong, which is not totally implausible. People get things wrong. They were trying to get things together in 18 months, and maybe they were sloppy or something like that. But the conspiracy, the 25 different possible conspiracies, all require a level of manipulation, containment, totalistic control,
the discrediting of the institutions which are supposed to render objective reality. So the fact that it's a small thing, but in 1963, in the aftermath, the first thing that Jackie Kennedy and the Democrats say is that a climate of hate, right-wing hate in Dallas, killed the president. When in fact it was a communist who went to the Soviet Union who killed the president. It wasn't right-wing hate. Maybe it was left-wing hate. Or the Warren Commission having Alan Dulles, and then, not mentioning all kinds of the CIA not providing them information, all kinds of things that, could have been run down, but didn't necessarily prove that they were culpable. But there's all kinds of things that the government did in trying to explain the story that eroded the trust that people would have had once more information came out. And including, for me, the most amazing thing is that even Lyndon Baines Johnson, who commissioned the Warren Commission, didn't believe that Oswald acted alone, and said so to Walter Cronkite right before he died. So the idea, some of it is, I agree with you that you have to sort of get yourself into a place where you believe that nothing is real and there's always something behind the scenes. But there's another factor in that, which is the institutions, the nothing works, which is a great theme of the Commentary podcast, has frittered away much public trust. And boy, did the Biden administration fritter away lots of public trust in so many ways, but obviously the most obvious way is explaining that the president himself was sentient and had enough stamina and mental acuity to be the president.
Which is one of Abe's 11, right? That's one of your 11 shocks, right? The fact we had a senile president, and we were told for 2 years that he wasn't senile. And just this week, the books are now starting to come out with these stories. Eric Swalwell telling Amy Parnes and Jonathan Martin that he saw Biden in 2023 known Biden for years. They come face to face, and Biden doesn't recognize him like that. So, and
That was
he's
like, I mean,
going on TV, huh?
But Biden's, incapacity was like the sleeper shock, because it wasn't. We were outraged, and I remember Eli being on the podcast at the time. We were outraged, but no one, it was like sort of ignored. But the resonance of that, the shock waves that has produced since, I think, are incalculable. I mean,
Okay, but
and I'm
you know
actually
what?
interested to hear your perspective on this, Abe. On that point, was you could argue that Biden's election was the public voting for a return to normalcy, whatever you want to call it.
that was the pitch.
Mistaken, right? They thought they were voting for that, but was that a sign that the public does tire of all this chaos, and that when Biden was elected, he turned out not to be that guy, and it turned out that the normal guy, the return to normalcy guy, was his own form of chaos that was just as bad as anything else, and maybe people stopped believing in the idea that we could vote out chaos or whatever. But I mean, I'm curious to hear, like, is one of the legacies of Biden that they missing the fact that the people actually do and did vote for sidelining chaos every so often when they get the chance?
Yeah, and then he re-traumatized us.
Yeah. Well, by the way, what's important here is, Eli mentions that the 70s were insane. 79 and 80 were insane. The years that people don't even, if you list, I almost wrote a book once called about 1979. If you list what happened in 1979, you would not believe how crazy things were. We had a massive environmental leak in upstate New York. We had a almost near meltdown of a nuclear plant in Pennsylvania. We had a communist regime takeover in Nicaragua. We had reports of Soviet Union taking over in Afghanistan. We had Iran take over we had the Ayatollah take over in Iran. We had a second we had an oil shock, like week after week after week after week. And then the Republicans nominated this former movie actor, and everybody among conventional opinion said, this guy is a lunatic who wants to bring about World War III because he's got an eschatological doctrine that says that the world should end in a nuclear war, and this is crazy. And then it turned out that he was the most normal person ever to be president, practically, and that he just applied common sense ideas to things and saved America from this incredible spiral. And Biden turned out to be exactly the outright. We're in COVID, we're in George Floyd, we're this, and it's like, just elect this like nice old guy. He was vice president for a while. Scranton Joe, he seems totally normal. He gets elected, and then 3 people say to him, you could be FDR, and he spends $6 trillion and goes senile, causes 10% inflation, schools are shut down, people wearing lipstick and dresses with beards are running our nuclear waste program. And girls and boys are winning girls' swim meets, and everybody goes, "What? Okay, so you told me Donald Trump was crazy? This is crazier than Donald Trump in the end when it comes down to it, even though Biden wasn't the candidate in 2024. It was sort of like, all right, well, I kind of believed you that there was a way back. I don't see a way back. This wasn't a way back. Reagan was a way back, but this is...
But I think that the Trump White House is making this a similar kind of mistake, because the Biden people thought, well, it doesn't really matter. We're running against Trump, and they, by the way, the Democratic Party wanted Trump to be the nominee, as we've talked about on other podcasts. And then I see the same thing. I mean, if you talk to MAGA people, what they'll tell you is, oh, the Democrats are finished. They've got such a generational hole to dig out of. Give it some time. More of this nonsense, and we'll see. We'll see what happens in the midterms. You'd be surprised how, because this isn't working either. This is why
I want to go back to that chart that I mentioned, the 81 to 14 free trade versus,
Right.
free trade, a positive, negative. So from 2023 onward, the 66% of the American people told the Democratic Party they wanted a different candidate for president of the United States. 66% of Democrats said they wanted a different candidate. And everyone went, it's like, hello, red. I mean, it's not even, the word red flag doesn't even begin to describe it. Trump, in the face of this poll, and I even take Abe's point that the poll is more ambiguous than 81-14. Let's say it's 62-38. There is evidence that Americans like free trade, and Trump is like, I don't care. It's like, okay, don't care. Aside from whatever the results are going to be, which I think we all agree are going to be parlous, but even if we don't know that they're going to be parlous, it's like, don't do that. Politics doesn't work like that. You don't like thumb your nose at American public opinion so readily. We're a democratic republic. You work for the people. I mean, I'm sorry. Like, yes, as I said, on immigration, the people are with you. On economic growth, it is way not clear that the people are with him at all. So, Abe, one last point, because I was thinking, I just, I'm in like in a Dostoevsky mode, and we keep publishing articles by the brilliant Gary Saul Morson about various things that Dostoevsky wrote a piece for us about the demons, his novel about revolutionary, about the revolutionary fervor, and
which was great, and
then he just wrote a piece for us about the Ivan Karma, about Hamas and its treatment of children, and how that is reflected in the amazing chapter 4 of the Brothers Karamazov. And he famously said, "Without God, everything is permitted." Right? That is the famous sentence from the Brothers Karamazov. Without God, everything is permitted. And there is something in that passage of yours about the world that people are hoping for, the world that these sort of people are now seeming increasingly wanting to live in, that has this weird paganistic, without God, everything is permitted quality, which is, so they don't believe in God, they don't believe in tradition, they don't believe in the things that belief in God often bring you, which is a sense of continuity with people from the early, certainly if you're Jewish, the earliest times and all of that. So they want to become gods themselves. They want to reverse engineer. They want to live forever. They want to, they whatever. They want AI to take over everything. They are enchanted, as somebody might say. Like they're fascinated by a more enchanted world, because all they're getting is this nonsense.
Yes.
Got anything to?
Well, I mean. Well, as you put it before, they want to live in a magical world. That's
who doesn't?
Right.
I mean, that's the whole. I remember reading once about why Americans are so why people, all fantasies in all countries and everywhere. Why why there's always a figure, the idea that you're a human being who can fly. Why this exists, and why this is one of the dominating primal fantasies, that you could fly like Superman or fly or whatever. And it's because when you're a baby and you can't move, somebody comes and picks you up and transports you from one place to another. And since you don't understand cause and effect precisely, that this is registered in the human brain, the universal human brain, as this, hey, I need to go from here to there, and suddenly, just through force of will, I'm being moved through the sky from one place to another. Then you learn that that's not how it works, and you could walk by yourself. But this pre-verbal, pre-linguistic, pre-cause and effect thing just sticks in your head forever. And that is where magic, that is where the belief in magic might in part originate. Not that it's sort of, I don't know
and
why
the thing
I'm
is,
bringing that up,
also but with all these alternatives to religion, the the benefit, which of course is not a benefit, but the immediate benefit, the illusory benefit, is that they don't obligate you to anything in terms of behavior, ethics, charity. You can just take. That's the real gift.
I will say the creepiest part about this, and not to get overly I'm very grateful to Trump for the way he's behaved toward Israel, and I'm very grateful to him for the things that he's doing to combat anti-Semitism. But there's one thing that he represents as a form of Jewish heresy without even knowing that he does so, and that is the thing that will make it difficult for Congress to do what it needs to do to take the power of the tariffing away from him, which, as Eli brings up, is something that it really can do. And that is idol worship, that he has created a condition inside the Republican Party in which he is the static figure, and fealty to him and who he is and what he believes is what matters and how this works. And Judaism is a religion that is built on the idea that idolatry is the greatest of all heresies, and that worshiping men as idols or idols as idols or something like that, as opposed to understanding that God is to be worshipped and God is everywhere and nowhere and is not corporeal, is a very important jump. And when I hear Howard Lutnick or Laura Loomer talk about Trump, I am listening to somebody who is, literally experiencing idol worship. Both of them, by the way, born Jewish. So that's really great for us. Yay, Jews.
So can we just take a second on the Laura Loomer
I was just going to say, if you watch us on YouTube, you just got to see Eli's head literally explode.
Yes.
Like, you're taking advice from a third-rate conspiracy theorist on who's staffing the National Security Council.
Third rate? I mean, you're rating her very high to call her third rate.
Seventh rate. I mean, it's just like, she's a 9/11 truther, and she's a lunatic. And I understand in the context of a campaign, he has a kind of broad coalition of people, and if it's or like if you sometimes you have people that you're like, all right, they get out votes, and she's an influencer or something like that. She's like she's in his ear on important policy matters, and
we should explain what this is because people may not know. Yesterday on Thursday, Laura Loomer, Wednesday afternoon, Laura Loomer went into the White House. I don't know what you would call it. Yeah, she was sort of like an internet personality, Twitter, whatever. Ended up running for Congress, didn't get there.
Her
Trump likes her.
Was chaining herself to Google.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And wedding herself.
Right. Anyway, she's nuts, and I say that as a psychiatrist, deeply not a psychiatrist, but I don't need to be a psychiatrist to know that she's nuts. I once listened to her on Mark Halperin's wonderful 2A podcast, and it was like visiting the psycho ward. It was like visiting a psych ward, listening to her talk about herself. So I'm happy to say this. She went in the Oval Office and said there were all these people in the administration who are disloyal to you, named a bunch of people on the National Security Council, including a couple of friends of ours. And now that I mentioned that they're friends of ours, of course, this is why they should be fired, according to a lot of people, because they're friends of ours. And people got fired as a result of this conversation. But it's worse than that, because it's not about Laura Loomer. Laura Loomer doesn't know David Feith from Adam. She doesn't know who David Feith is. She doesn't know what he did. He worked for Trump in the first term and seemed to be fine with him then. What she knows is somebody handed her a list to give to Trump to see if they might get some scalps. So the question is, who is that? Now I'm going to the person behind it. Who is that person? What Tuckerite? What Vancy? What person gave Laura Loomer the list to see if she could get Trump to intervene and get rid of people that the Tuckerite wing of the party doesn't want from the National Security Council. That's what we need to know, not her, in my estimation. Anyway, all right. So we've insulted people, we've defamed people, I've called people idol worshipers. This is the month of Passover, in which we do talk a lot about idol worship at the Seder. So I think I'm going to leave it there because things are spinning off out of control. Please, if you haven't done it already, you heard the brilliant newsletter from yesterday, go to commentary.org, go to the top menu, click on newsletter, subscribe to Abe Greenwald's daily newsletter. Eli Lake, Breaking History, current podcast about Edward Said, the great
Orientalism and its discontents.
Yes, Edward Said, professor at Columbia, and the person who is singularly responsible for the destruction of the study of Middle Eastern matters in the United States. One tidbit detail: Edward Said goes to grammar school with Omar Sharif. And Omar Sharif, in a moment to rival his incredible, glorious, glamorous turn in Lawrence of Arabia as the rebel chief, beats up Edward Said in grade school.
In front of his classmates, yes.
So I could not love Omar Sharif. I thought I couldn't love Omar Sharif anymore. And yet, Eli introduced me
There
to
are
a new
two
level.
kinds of people in the world. There's Omar Sharif and Edward Said. Be Omar Sharif.
Be Omar Sharif. Anyway, he was also one of the world's great bridge players, but whatever. That it's not about Omar Sharif, but perhaps it's time to do a celebration of Omar Sharif under other circumstances. Anyway, Eli Lake, everybody should subscribe to Breaking History, presented by the Free Press. Fantastic, life-changing mini documentaries about
Thank you.
America. And we will be back on Monday. So for Abe and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.